I ruined my life with a single question. And no, I don't regret it. They say knowledge is power. But they never say what it does to your relationships, your sleep, your sense of home. They never say what it breaks. It started as a flicker, a vague discomfort I couldn't name, like I was living in a world that made sense to everyone but me. One night at dinner, I asked what happens when we die, not poetically, just directly. And the room shifted. My mother looked at her plate. My father cleared his throat. No one answered. But I had touched something. I hadn't found truth, only silence. A silence that vibrated with something hidden. That's when I first heard you. Not your voice, your presence. You didn't arrive with fire in your hands. You were the fire, the one hiding behind my questions, waiting for me to ask again. You didn't offer comfort, you offered tension. You offered curiosity sharpened into rebellion. You were my Prometheus. Not the hero from the old myths, but the part of me that refused to accept easy answers. You never introduced yourself, you didn't give me a reason. You just lit the match, and suddenly I couldn't unknow what I hadn't yet learned. It was like sensing a door in the wall I'd stared at my whole life, a door everyone pretended wasn't there. I started asking more, not to be difficult, but because I couldn't help it. And the more I asked, the more alone I became. There's something dangerous about curiosity. Not the innocent kind, the sacred kind, the kind that looks behind the curtain and dares to say what it sees. I didn't know it yet, but I'd already left the village, not with my feet, but with my mind. And you were walking ahead of me, torch in hand, without ever looking back. That was the first spark. And though the fire hadn't spread yet, I already knew something was about to burn. There are moments that split your life in half, not with noise, with stillness. For me, it was a sentence, tucked in the pages of an old philosophy book I hadn't even planned to open. This it read, "To know is to be unfit for life." I didn't understand it, but it understood me. I walked out of that bookstore and the world had looked the same, but nothing felt real. People moved like actors in a scene I could suddenly see through. Everything that once felt solid now shimmered with illusion. That was the moment the gift landed, and it was not a gift. It was a trespass, like I'd crossed into territory humans were never meant to enter. Like Eve taking the fruit, like the Watchers descending from the heavens with secrets not meant for Earth. It didn't feel like learning, it felt like breaking and entering. And yet there was no turning back. The fruit was eaten, the fire was touched. I began to notice things others didn't, the tension behind their laughter, the contradiction in their stories, the machinery beneath their beliefs. And I began to understand why people cling so tightly to illusion, because reality, unfiltered, is sharp, it cuts. I wanted to share what I was seeing, but every time I tried, the room got colder. People nodded politely, then changed the subject. Some didn't come back. I hadn't just changed, I had committed a social crime. I had stopped pretending. The truth didn't make me wise, it made me inconvenient. And that's when I realized what your gift really was, Prometheus. It wasn't clarity, it wasn't power, it was isolation. You hadn't brought me into the light, you had burned down the house I used to live in and left me in the ashes. And yet somewhere in those ashes I found a strange kind of reverence, not peace, not joy, but reverence. Because now I saw the cost, and that meant I was finally seeing the truth. And that was when the fire truly began. No one tells you how quietly a life unravels. There's no explosion, no breaking glass. Just distance. One day you realize you're on the other side of a conversation that used to feel like home. I thought waking up would bring me closer to others. I thought truth would create connection. But it didn't. It created heat. And that heat burned the bridges I didn't know were made of paper. You gave me the fire, Prometheus, but you never warned me it would cast shadows no one else wanted to stand in. That once I saw the world unmasked, I'd be the one wearing something unfamiliar. They stopped calling, not because I changed my number, but because I stopped speaking their language. There is a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from seeing too much, from knowing that the stories we tell ourselves about safety, about fairness, about how things work, are often just lullabies we hum to keep the dark at bay. And I tried to share what I was seeing, at first gently, then urgently, then not at all. Because every truth I carried into a room felt like a wrecking ball, even when I whispered. And you stood at a distance, watching me burn. Not out of malice, out of knowing. I began to understand what kind of lineage I had joined. Semmelweis, the doctor who realized hand-washing could save lives. They ignored him, laughed at him, locked him in a madhouse where he died, bleeding from the same infection he tried to prevent. Mansur al-Hallaj, a mystic who said, "I am the truth," not out of arrogance, but recognition. They tore him apart. You knew their names. And now I did too, not as martyrs, as mirrors. That was the real burn, not the isolation, not the loss, but the realization that this wasn't personal. This was a pattern, a system. The fire is never welcomed, it's feared. Because fire doesn't just illuminate, it forces change. It demands that lies collapse. And so we pay for it over and over, with friendships, with safety, with the quiet comfort of being easily understood. One night I sat across from someone I used to love. I told the truth, gently, carefully. And I watched their face close, like a book they no longer wanted to read. That moment burned more than anything else. Because that's when I understood the cost wasn't just mine. It would echo, it would ripple. Truth doesn't just isolate you, it isolates the people who try to stay near you. You gave me fire, and it lit the world, but it also lit the fuse. And now everything I thought would be built on this truth was already turning to ash. There's a kind of silence that isn't empty. It's full of everything you used to believe, echoing back at you with new eyes. After the fire, there's no applause. No audience waiting to thank you for your courage, just stillness. And in that stillness, the question grows, what now? I tried to return, to sit at the tables I used to belong to laugh at things I no longer found funny, to nod when everything in me screamed no. But pretending feels like choking after you've tasted oxygen. It's unbearable. And yet, so is the silence. People don't exile you with hate. They exile you with absence, with a pause in the conversation when your truth touches the air, with a look that says, "We liked you better before." I stopped speaking, not because I lost my voice, but because no one wanted to hear it. There is no space in polite society for the one who names the fault lines. So I withdrew, smiled less, listened more. Not out of wisdom, out of exhaustion. You told me to carry the flame. You didn't tell me the weight of carrying it alone. And yet, I wasn't the first. Cassandra saw the fall of Troy, warned them, they called her mad. Because the truth she carried didn't fit their plan. They didn't want vision, they wanted reassurance. And so they silenced her with disbelief. It's a pattern, isn't it? You're not punished for being wrong. You're punished for being right too soon. For holding a mirror before the world when it's still in love with its mask. That's what you gave me, Prometheus. Not knowledge, not power, but exile. I missed the lies. They were easier to carry, but the door is closed now. The one I walked through when the spark caught flame, and I can't unwalk it. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wonder, would I trade it all back? The clarity, the solitude, the burn. Would I give it all away just to be accepted again? But even as I ask it, I know the answer. Because even in the silence, even in the ache, I can still feel it. The ember you placed in my hands, it still glows. And maybe that's enough for now. Even if no one else sees it. Even if it has to burn in the dark. There's a question that lives under every truth I've ever touched. It waits, it doesn't shout. It just lingers, quiet as smoke after the fire has passed. Was it worth it? Not the truth itself. That's never the question. The question is the cost. The burn marks, the cold rooms. The birthdays where no one calls anymore. I lost people. Not because they stopped loving me, but because I stopped being someone they recognized. When you carry fire, you don't get to keep the masks. And maybe the hardest part wasn't the isolation. It was knowing I couldn't explain it. Not fully, not without burning everything else down with it. I thought about taking it back. The whole journey. Going back to that moment before the match struck. Before I stepped across that invisible line. Before you handed me this beautiful, cursed flame. But even in the moments I wished for sleep again, I knew something in me was already too far gone to dream. The fire had rewritten my soul. So I asked the only question left: if I could go back, would I? Would I unask the questions that made me an outsider? Would I trade the ache for belonging? Would I let myself believe again, even if it meant lying to myself? The answer didn't come quickly, it came in fragments. In the silence after another dinner where no one asked how I was. In the space between a text sent and a reply that never came. And then I remembered the orchard. The Talmud says 4 entered it in search of divine knowledge. 1 died, 1 went mad. 1 became a heretic, only 1 returned in peace. But they all entered, and not a single one stayed the same. I used to wonder which one I was. Now I understand that just stepping into that place, the space beyond comfort, beyond certainty, was the answer itself. You never promised safety, Prometheus. You never said the fire would make me whole. You just offered it, and I reached for it with both hands. So was it worth it? It hurt, it cost. It burned, but it was real. And real, no matter the pain, is something I'll never trade again. Because what I've lost may never return, but what I found, that stays. Even in the dark, especially there. I still carry it, through the silence, through the cold, through the spaces where my old life no longer fits. I've tried to set it down, tried to go back to the dream, but the ember stays. It doesn't blaze, it doesn't demand, it just endures. There were nights I wanted peace. Not the peace of clarity, the peace of forgetting. The kind of peace you find when you give up your questions and learn to smile on command. But the ember wouldn't let me. Because once you've carried fire, you can't go back to plastic light. You made sure of that, Prometheus. You, who stole flame from the gods and gave it to creatures who would both use it and curse it. You who weren't honored but hunted. You who were chained for the crime of illuminating the blind. You knew what this would do to me. Not just the knowledge, the aftermath. The silence, the suspicion, the weight. But you also knew something else. That there's a power in carrying what others are too afraid to hold. Not pride, not ego, but conviction. The fire you gave me stripped away who I thought I was. But in the ashes, I found someone who wasn't afraid to see. Not because I'm strong, but because I'm already burned. And you can't scare what's already been through the fire. Some gifts don't heal you, they haunt you. But they give your life shape and meaning and truth. I still carry this ember, not to light the world, but to remind myself that I lived awake. That I saw, that I chose, that I kept going, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. Because this isn't just a story of what I lost, it's a story of what I became. And if you've carried this kind of flame, if you've ever lost everything because you chose to see clearly, then this letter was written for you too. Write your version, leave it below, speak it out loud. Because those of us who walk with the ember, we don't need millions. We just need to know we're not alone. This was my letter to Prometheus. To the one who gave me fire, knowing it would burn me. To the one who watched me fall but never turned away. You didn't save me, you forged me. And maybe that's the point. So if this lit something in you, share it. Let someone else see the glow. Because this fire, it was never meant to be carried alone.